The slap did not just sting my cheek, it sucked the oxygen right out of the room. Yet the true horror was my daughter-in-law clapping her hands as if she had just witnessed a show. I stood up slowly and dialed one number. My son's face drained of colour the moment he realised he had lost control of this dinner forever. My name is Marianne Caldwell. I am 57 years old, and for the last 3 decades, I have believed that a well-cooked meal could fix almost anything, standing in my kitchen in Briar Glen, Wisconsin. I still held on to that foolish hope as I engaged in the weekly ritual designed to keep my family from dissolving completely. The roast chicken crackled in the oven, sending the scent of rosemary and garlic through the house. It was a sensory barricade I built every Sunday to keep the silence out. My son, Derek, arrived 20 minutes late. He is 31 years old, a grown man who still entered my home with the air of a landlord coming to inspect a delinquent property. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was. He walked in with his eyes glued to his smartphone, his thumb scrolling incessantly. He scanned the kitchen, my sanctuary, with a critical sneer, as if he were grading the cleanliness of the counters and finding them unworthy of his presence. Across from him sat Tessa, his wife. She did not scroll. She sat perfectly straight, her hands folded neatly on the tablecloth. There was a small, tight smile playing on her lips, the expression of someone who had already seen the script and was just waiting for the actors to hit their marks. She looked at me, then at Derek, with a terrifying kind of anticipation. I brought the serving platter to the table, the china clattering slightly against the wood. I sat down and unfolded my napkin. Derek was still typing, the blue light from the screen reflecting in his glasses. "Derek," I said, keeping my voice light, trying to sound like the mother I used to be. "Please put the phone away. Let's talk like adults. It is Sunday." The air in the room shifted instantly. Derek stopped typing. He did not look up immediately. He let the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating. Then he set the phone down on the table, face up, screen still glowing. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust that made my stomach turn. "You," he started, his voice low and dangerous. "You still think you have the right to teach me? You really think you have any say in how I conduct my business?" He stood up. The chair scraped harsh against the floorboards. I gripped my linen napkin under the table until my knuckles turned white. This was not new. For over a year, the psychological jabs had been constant little comments designed to make me doubt my memory, my competence, my worth. But I stayed seated. I tried to maintain the dignity of the dinner table. "I just wanted us to have a nice meal," I whispered. "A nice meal." Derek mocked. He leaned over the table. "You are delusional. Mother, you live in a fantasy world while I clean up your mess." Then he moved. It happened so fast, yet in my memory, it plays out frame by frame. He did not lash out in a blind rage. He stepped around the corner of the table. He raised his hand. He looked me directly in the eyes to ensure I was watching, and he swung. Smack. The sound was wet and sharp. His palm connected with my left cheek with calculated force. My head snapped to the right. My ear rang. It was not a slap of passion. It was a slap of correction. It was a physical punctuation mark designed to end a sentence I had not even finished speaking. The kitchen went dead silent. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to stop. I stared at the wall, my hand hovering over my stinging cheek, unable to process the betrayal. Then came the sound that cut deeper than the blow. Clap, clap, clap. Slow, rhythmic, dry. I turned my head slowly. Tessa was applauding. She was not looking at Derek with fear. She was looking at me with triumph. "About time," Tessa said, her voice smooth and poisonous. "She needs to know her place." Something inside me broke. But it was not a break that leads to collapse. It was the breaking of a seal, the breaking of an illusion. The mother who cooked roasts and begged for connection died in that chair. I stood up slowly. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not reach for an ice pack. My movements were fluid and precise. I looked at my son, and for the first time in his life, I did not see my child. I saw a stranger standing in my kitchen. I felt a cold, metallic clarity wash over my brain. I had just locked a heavy steel door in my heart, and I had thrown away the key. It is strange what the mind does in moments of trauma. Instead of focusing on the stinging pain radiating across my face, my brain retreated into a cold, analytical file cabinet of memory. I was not always a trembling old woman clutching a napkin. For 25 years, I was the team lead for contract compliance at the Ravenwood Municipal Procurement Office. My job was to find the lies hidden in the fine print. I was the woman who spotted the discrepancies in construction bids that saved the town millions. I was disciplined. I was sharp. I was not someone easily led by the nose. But grief is a heavy fog, and it makes you miss the things right in front of your face. When my husband Frank died of a massive stroke 3 years ago, the silence in this house became deafening. That was when Derek suddenly reappeared in my life with a newfound intensity. At first, I was so desperate for the noise of family that I mistook his presence for affection. I wanted to believe that my son had returned to comfort his grieving mother. I was wrong. I should have seen it in the phone calls. They never began with a greeting. There was never a warm inquiry about my health or my garden. The phone would ring. I would answer with a hopeful hello, and Derek would cut straight through with a demand. "Mom, I need you to sign this authorization form for the bank," he would say. His voice always rushed, always urgent. If I hesitated, he would sigh, a long, ragged sound of performative exhaustion. "Mom, do you want to help me or not?" And there was Tessa. She played the part of the dutiful daughter-in-law, but her politeness was a thin veneer over a core of disdain. I remember sitting in the sunroom with her just last month. She was sipping iced tea, looking at me over the rim of her glass with eyes that assessed rather than observed. "You know, Marianne," she had said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Your generation, you really cling to your children. It is not healthy. You need to let Derek lead." I brushed it off then, just like I brushed off the incident at Thanksgiving last year. I had spent 2 days preparing Frank's favourite chestnut stuffing and roasting a 20-pound turkey. When I set the platter down, Derek poked at the bird with his fork, a look of distaste curling his lip. "This is so rustic." "Mom," he had sneered, "next year, can we just cater sushi? Nobody eats this heavy peasant food anymore." Tessa had laughed then, a small, conspiring sound that made me feel small in my own dining room. Bit by bit, they had been stripping away my authority. It started with the insults to my cooking, then moved to my competence. "You do not understand modern finance." "Mom," Derek would say whenever I asked about a bill, "the markets are too complex for you now." I blamed myself. I told myself I was being too sensitive. Derek is my only child. I confused love with permission. I thought that by letting him take control, I was showing him I trusted him. I thought I was being a good mother, but I was just being a compliant victim. The warning signs had turned into sirens in the last week, and I had covered my ears. Derek had stopped asking about dinner and started asking about infrastructure. Where exactly is the key to the wall safe he had asked just last Tuesday? His eyes scanning the study. And Mom. What was Dad's old PIN number again? The one he used for the master accounts. He was not visiting his mother. He was auditing an acquisition. As I stood there in the kitchen, the heat of his handprint fading into a dull throb on my skin, the fog finally lifted. I looked at the roast chicken sitting untouched on the table. I looked at the bottle of wine Derek had opened, but not poured. This was not a family dinner. This was a hostile takeover meeting, and I was the only person in the room who had not been given a copy of the agenda. The tension in the room did not explode out of nowhere. It was built brick by brick, with small, mundane oddities that I had initially tried to ignore. Before we even sat down, Derek had mentioned casually that he brought a document for me to review. He called it a standard insurance update, a mere formality to keep my coverage current. But as I looked at the folder sitting next to the gravy boat, the lie became obvious. Insurance updates are usually a single page or a digital notification. This was a thick stack of paper, bound with a heavy clip and marked with color-coded sticky tabs. It looked like a litigation file, not a policy renewal. Tessa had moved her chair, usually. She sat opposite me at the other end of the table, maximizing the distance between us. Tonight, however, she had pulled her chair around the corner, positioning herself uncomfortably close to my left side. I could smell her perfume, a heavy floral scent that suddenly felt suffocating. She was not just sitting there. She was angling her body toward me, effectively blocking my path to the hallway. It felt like a containment maneuver. Derek reached into his jacket pocket and produced a pen. It was a heavy, expensive fountain pen. He uncapped it and placed it carefully on my linen napkin. "Just sign the tabs," I marked. "Mum," he said, his voice dripping with a synthetic sweetness that set my teeth on edge. "Sign them? Then we can eat and have a fun night." "I know you are hungry." I put on my reading glasses and opened the folder. My eyes, trained by 25 years of auditing municipal contracts, did not read the sentences linearly. I scanned for the binding terms. I looked for the verbs that defined obligation. The phrases jumped out at me, stinging worse than any insult. Durable power of attorney, irrevocable trust, right of survivorship, quitclaim. These were not insurance terms. These were terms of surrender. "Derek," I said, looking over the rim of my glasses. "This is not insurance. This document gives you full power of attorney. It grants you the right to transfer assets without my consent. Why is there a quitclaim deed for this house in here?" The mask of the dutiful son slipped. Derek slammed his open palm onto the table, making the silverware jump and clatter. "God, why do you always make this so hard?" he shouted, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "You always have to question me." Tessa leaned in, her shoulder pressing firmly against mine, trapping me in my seat. "Marianne, please," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "If Frank were here, surely he would want Derek to handle these things for you. He would hate to see you struggling to understand finances like this." The mention of Frank was a precision strike. They knew his name was my weak point. But instead of making me cry, it made me focus. Frank would never have asked me to sign a blind contract. I am not signing this, I said, closing the folder. Give it to me. Derek lunged across the table. He grabbed the top edge of the paperwork. I grabbed the bottom. No, I need to read it first. He pulled. I held firm. He snarled, a guttural sound of frustration, and then he let go of the paper with one hand and swung the other. The slap cracked against my face. It was the physical punctuation mark that ended the negotiation. But as I stood there, the shock vibrating through my skull, I realized the most terrifying part was not the blow itself. It was the coordination. When Tessa clapped her hands, it was not a spontaneous reaction to violence. It was a signal. Derek looked at her immediately after he hit me, his chest heaving, seeking approval. He looked like a performer checking with the director. He hit me because she signaled him to escalate. I realized. My eyes darted past them to the far corner of the kitchen, near the pantry. There, mounted on the wall, was my old beige landline phone. It was a relic I had kept for emergencies, assuming the emergency would be a storm or a power outage. I never imagined the emergency would be sitting at my dinner table. A cold, tactical plan formed in my mind. I would not scream. I would not debate. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I am not going to argue with you, I told myself as the room spun slightly. I am going to call the one person who knows exactly what a fraud case looks like. I dipped the corner of my linen napkin into my water glass, with slow, circular motions. I began to wipe a splatter of red wine from the white tablecloth. It was a dark, jagged stain that had splashed when Derek slammed the table. I focused entirely on the fabric. I rubbed until the red faded to a dull pink. I was not cleaning up a spilled drink. I was preserving the crime scene. The room was so quiet I could hear the wet cloth dragging against the cotton weave. Derek let out a short, incredulous laugh. He stepped back, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and amusement, shaking his head. "What are you doing?" "Mum," he asked, "you are going to clean now. Look at you. You are pathetic. What exactly are you going to do, all the police? Go ahead. Call them." "Who are you going to call?" "You have no one. Dad is dead. Your bridge club friends are half senile. You are all alone in this big, empty house." I did not look at my son. I did not acknowledge his taunts. I reached into the deep pocket of my apron and withdrew my cell phone. My hand was steady. I unlocked the screen and opened my contact list. I did not dial 911. That was for panic. That was for people who did not know how the system worked. Instead, I scrolled past the neighbors and the doctors. I stopped at a name I had saved 5 years ago, back when I was still auditing city contracts and working with the task force on elder financial abuse. Once. Hayes Fraud, DV Liaison. I pressed the call button. I held the phone to my ear. Derek stepped forward, his face twisting into a sneer. "Give me the phone, Mom. Do not be dramatic." The line clicked. A deep, gruff voice answered. "Hayes." I spoke clearly. My voice was not the voice of a trembling mother. It was the voice of a woman who had spent 30 years reading the fine print. "This is Marianne Caldwell," I said. "I am at my residence. I have just been physically assaulted by my son." Derek froze mid-step. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I continued, deliberately emphasizing the next words. "And I have reason to believe he is attempting to force me to sign a fraudulent transfer of assets under duress." The change in the room was instantaneous. When I said assault, Derek looked annoyed. But when I said fraud, the blood drained from his face. He knew that word. Assault could be spun as a family dispute, a tragic accident, a he said, she said argument. Fraud was a felony. Fraud meant paper trails. Fraud meant prison. Tessa reacted instantly. She sprang from her chair, rushing toward me, her hands raised in a gesture of frantic appeasement. Her voice pitched up, loud and theatrical, intended for the person on the other end of the line. "Oh my God. Marianne," she shouted. "She is having an episode. She is so agitated. She does not know what she is saying. It is just a misunderstanding. Officer. She is confused." I pulled the phone away from my ear. I pressed the speaker icon. I held the device out in the space between us like a shield. "Ma'am." Lieutenant Hayes's voice filled the kitchen, sharp and distorted by the speaker. "Are you currently being threatened? Are there documents present at the scene?" Derek stared at the phone. He looked at the thick folder with the colored tabs lying on the table. He looked at the pen he had forced upon me. "Yes," I answered. "The documents are on the table. He is trying to take the house." Then I delivered the final blow. I looked straight into Derek's eyes. "And Lieutenant," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "The security cameras in the kitchen are active. The entire interaction is recording." It was the first time all evening that Derek looked truly small. The arrogance vanished. The landlord persona crumbled. He looked at the small black dome in the corner of the ceiling. He looked at the back door. He looked at the hallway. He was no longer the man in charge of the dinner. He was a man hearing the distant wail of sirens, realizing he had stayed at the scene of the crime too long. "I need to wash my face," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the tremors they expected. I did not wait for their permission. I turned my back on them and walked toward the small built-in desk near the pantry, a nook where I kept recipes and coupons. I turned on the tap in the small prep sink to create a sound barrier of running water. But I did not wash the red mark on my cheek. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer. Buried beneath a stack of expired warranties was a manila envelope Frank had left there before he passed. For 3 years, I had avoided it. It felt like touching a ghost. Today, I tore it open. Inside, there was a photocopy of a car lease agreement from 5 years ago and a handwritten note on yellow legal pad paper. Frank's handwriting was jagged, written shortly before the stroke took his motor skills. "Marianne, if Derek ever asks about the house title, be careful. He once borrowed your signature for this lease. I paid it off to keep him out of jail. Do not let him handle the books." My breath hitched. The memory slotted into place like a missing puzzle piece. A few months after Frank's funeral, I had received a letter from a bank regarding loan restructuring. I had been so consumed by grief, barely able to get out of bed, that I threw it away, assuming it was a solicitation or a clerical error. I had not been auditing my own life. I left the water running. I flipped open my laptop, which sat charging on the desk. My fingers, acting on the muscle memory of a career auditor, flew across the keys. I did not check my main inbox. I searched the history for the term confirmation. There it was. A chain of emails confirming the opening of a high-yield checking account. But they were not sent to my email. They were forwarded from an address I did not recognize. Marianne Xiu. Private mail. Com to my main account, and then immediately archived. Someone had created a shadow identity for me. Mom. Derek's voice drifted from the dining table. The aggression was gone, replaced by a whining, desperate tone that sickened me more than the slap. "Mom, please, turn off the speaker. We can fix this. Family business stays in the house. You are overreacting. I did not turn around." I clicked on the most recent email. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Tessa was creeping into the kitchen, her socks sliding silently on the hardwood. She was moving toward the counter where my phone lay, the call with Lieutenant Hayes still open. Her hand reached out, her fingers trembling, aiming to end the call. I spun around. I did not flinch. I looked her dead in the eye. "Don't," I said. It was a single word, but it landed with the weight of an anvil. Tessa froze, her hand hovering in midair. She looked at me and saw that the victim she thought she was managing had vanished. She stepped back, terrified. I turned back to the screen. I had found the smoking gun. It was a notification from a cloud storage service. A document had been uploaded just 20 minutes ago. While I was seasoning the chicken, the file name was Deed Transfer Final Scan, PDF. But it was the username that made my blood run cold. Uploaded by Frank Caldwell, Shawk's admin. Frank has been dead for 3 years. Dead men do not upload property deeds to the cloud. But people who know dead men's passwords do. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Last week, Derek had casually asked me for Dad's old PIN number because he claimed he wanted to access an old iPad to find family photos for a collage. He had not been looking for pictures. He had been fishing for the master key to Frank's digital life. I looked at the screen, then at the envelope in my hand. The slap was not an outburst of anger. It was a distraction. It was a method of intimidation designed to make me sign a paper quickly, so I would not look too closely at what they had already done online. They were not just abusive children. They were thieves. This was not a family dinner. It was a bank heist, and they had disguised it as care for an aging mother. "You used his account?" I whispered, loud enough for the microphone on my phone to pick up. "You used your dead father's account to upload the stolen deed." The silence that followed was absolute. They knew I had found it. Derek shifted his weight, his posture transforming from aggressive to pleading in the span of a heartbeat. He held his hands out, palms up, miming a gesture of misunderstood benevolence. "Mom, stop," he said, his voice trembling with a manufactured wobble. "You are twisting everything. I did this because you cannot handle it anymore. Look at this place. You are drowning in maintenance and bills. I only wanted to help you. I wanted to make sure you were secure." I looked at him across the kitchen island. The red mark on my cheek throbbed in time with my pulse, a hot reminder of his definition of security. "Help," I asked, my voice cutting through his performance like a scalpel. "You help me by drafting a quitclaim deed behind my back. You help me by assigning yourself power of attorney? Or did you mean you were helping me when you slapped my face in my own kitchen because I dared to read a contract?" Tessa stepped in, her voice pitched loud and shrill, clearly aiming for the microphone on my phone. She looked frantically toward the ceiling, as if trying to convince an invisible jury. "She has not been right since Frank died," Tessa declared, shaking her head with exaggerated pity. "She has these paranoid narratives. She forgets things. She creates enemies out of family members. It is grief, purely grief. She has emotional problems. I do not have emotional problems. Tessa, I have evidence," I said, keeping my eyes locked on Derek. I listed the items with the precision of a prosecutor. "I found the shadow account you opened in my name. I found the scan of the house title. I saw the confirmation emails from the bank sent to the address you created to hide the notifications from me. That is a lie, Derek shouted, slamming his hand on the back of a chair. I never uploaded anything to SafeStore. You are making things up to frame me. The room went dead silent. The air conditioner hummed. The refrigerator cycled off. I waited 1 beat, 2 beats. I let his words hang in the air, heavy and irreversible. I never said the name of the cloud service. I said softly, I just said I found a scan. I never mentioned SafeStore. Derek's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted to Tessa, then back to me. He realized too late that he had just stepped into a trap of his own making. He had confessed to the crime in the act of denying it. You. He stammered. You tricked me. No, I replied. You convicted yourself. Tessa abandoned the strategy of gaslighting and pivoted instantly to emotional blackmail. She rushed forward, grabbing the edge of the island, her knuckles white. Do you want your son in prison? She hissed, her face contorted with desperation. Is that what you want, to see him in handcuffs? What kind of mother does that to her own child? Do you have no heart? Are you even a mother anymore? The question was meant to break me. It was meant to trigger the guilt that mothers are programmed to feel, the instinct to protect our young no matter how monstrous they become. But as I looked at Derek, a man of 31 who had hit me and tried to steal the roof over my head, I felt that instinct curdle into something harder. It is because I am his mother that I have to do this. I answered, my voice steady and cold. I have to stop him before he becomes the kind of man who thinks violence and forgery can replace morality. If I let this go, I am not loving him. I am accomplishing his corruption. Derek's face darkened. The fear of prison was replaced by a flash of pure, animalistic rage. He took a step toward me, his shoulders hunched, his hands curling into fists. He looked ready to snatch the papers, the phone, or perhaps to strike me again to silence the truth. Give me the phone. Mom, he growled, stepping into my personal space. Give it to me now. I did not retreat. I lifted the phone higher, pointing the back of the device directly at his face. Everything is recording, Derek, I said. The police are listening, and the camera is watching. Take one more step, and you add a second assault charge to the list. Blue and red lights washed across the floral curtains of my kitchen window, strobing in time with the silence that had fallen over the room. The sound of tires crushing the gravel in the driveway was the loudest thing in the world. Derek, who had been looming over me just seconds ago, took a half-step backward. It was the instinctive retreat of a bully who had never expected to face a consequence that he could not shout down. The doorbell did not ring. There was a heavy, authoritative knock. I walked to the door and opened it. 2 men stood on the porch. One was a uniformed patrol officer, young and stiff. The other was an older man in a rumpled suit, wearing a badge on his belt that identified him as Lieutenant Hayes. He looked exactly like his voice, tired, sharp, and utterly unimpressed by domestic drama. Mrs. Caldwell Hayes asked, stepping into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. Is the individual who struck you still on the premises? Any weapons in the house? He is in the kitchen. I replied, my voice steady. No firearms, just a fountain pen he used to try and coerce a signature. We walked back into the kitchen. Derek and Tessa were standing near the island, looking like children caught breaking a vase, but with darker eyes. Who is the aggressor? The uniformed officer asked. his hand resting near his belt. I did not point a shaking finger. I did not dissolve into tears. I approached the situation as I had approached every audit in my 30-year career. I turned my face to the light, so the swelling red welt on my cheek was clearly visible. Then, I pointed to the stack of papers on the table. My son, Derek Caldwell, struck me. I stated clearly. The assault occurred immediately after I refused to sign that document, which transfers power of attorney and ownership of this property to him. Derek let out a nervous, breathless laugh, running a hand through his hair. Officer, come on. This is ridiculous. It is a family dispute. My mother is confused. We were just having a passionate discussion about her retirement care. Hayes did not look at Derek. He walked to the table and picked up the folder. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the legal jargon I had flagged earlier. A passionate discussion, Hayes repeated flatly. He looked up, locking eyes with Derek. Does a passionate discussion usually require a durable power of attorney with a waiver of beneficiary rights? Tessa stepped forward, trying to cut between me and the lieutenant. Her voice dropped to that sickly sweet tone she used when she wanted to manipulate a situation. Marianne. Honey, she said, reaching for my arm. Let's go into the living room. Just you and me. We can talk about this privately. You are overwhelmed. The uniformed officer stepped in front of her, blocking her path with a solid wall of blue nylon. Ma'am, step back. Do not attempt to isolate the victim. That is witness tampering. Tessa shrank back, her mouth snapping shut. Hayes was still staring at the documents. He pulled a pair of reading glasses from his pocket and peered at the bottom of the quitclaim deed. He ran his thumb over the unique font of the header. Interesting, Hayes muttered, more to himself than anyone else. I saw this exact same boilerplate text in a case over in Winnebago County 2 months ago. Same typos in the liability clause. Same font. He looked up at Derek. The boredom was gone from his face, replaced by the sharpness of a hunter who just caught a scent. Sir, I need you to place your phone on the table, unlocked. We need to preserve digital evidence regarding the drafting of these documents. Derek's composure shattered. The landlord mask fell off, and the terrified criminal underneath clawed its way out. No, Derek shouted, his face turning a blotchy purple. You cannot do that. That is my private property. You have no warrant. I have probable cause linking this device to an attempted fraud in progress. Confirmed by the victim's testimony of digital trespassing, Hayes said, his voice hard as iron. Put the phone on the table, or you will be arrested for obstruction on top of the assault. Derek slammed the phone down. His hands were shaking so hard the device skittered across the wood. He was not angry about the invasion of privacy. He was terrified of what was in the memory. Hayes leaned in close to me, lowering his voice so only I could hear, Mrs. Caldwell, he whispered. Based on that document template, I do not think you are their first target. I looked at Derek. For the first time all night, he was not looking at me with contempt or pity. He was looking at me with pure, unadulterated panic. He realized, finally, that I had not just called the police to stop a fight. I had called the one man who could read the story his paperwork was telling. I had not just defended myself. I had exposed him. Lieutenant Hayes tapped the screen of his tablet and turned it toward me. The glow illuminated a flowchart that looked less like a family tree and more like a criminal enterprise. He did not treat me as a fragile victim. He treated me as a witness who needed to understand the scope of the crime scene. Mrs. Caldwell, Hayes said, his voice low and professional. Your son and his wife have been flagged in a preliminary investigation regarding a localized network. We call it deeds for cash. They target widows, usually over the age of 65, who own their homes outright. They convince them to sign over deeds under the guise of estate planning, then leverage the property for hard money loans they never intend to pay back. I stared at the screen. My eyes caught a name near the bottom of the list, and my breath caught in my throat. Janet Rourke. Janet was my friend. She sat 3 pews in front of me at church every Sunday, 6 months ago. She had told me how wonderful her son was for helping her modernize her assets. 2 weeks later, she had hurriedly sold her house and moved into a grim, 1-bedroom rental apartment, claiming she wanted to downsize. I realized now that she had not downsized. She had been evicted from her own life. I know her. I whispered. Janet. She told me her son was helping her with finances. He helped himself, Hayes corrected. And now I see the same pattern here. The isolation, the sudden urgency, the violence when the victim resists. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together. I was not just a mother having a bad night. I was a mark. I looked at Hayes. I want to give you everything. I unlocked my phone and transferred the access code for the kitchen security camera. I forwarded the hidden emails from the shadow account. Then, with a steady hand, I handed him the manila envelope Frank had left in the drawer. My husband knew, I said. He left this note. It proves Derek has a history of forgery. It proves premeditation. The officers separated Derek and Tessa. They moved Derek to the hallway, keeping him out of earshot of his wife. As he passed the doorway, he looked at me. His face was pale, sweating under the harsh hallway light. Mum, he choked out, his voice cracking. Mum, please, do not do this. It is me. It is your son. I looked at him. I searched for any spark of maternal instinct, any urge to run to him and fix it. There was nothing. It was like looking at a stranger who had broken into my house. I do not know who you are, I said. In the kitchen, Tessa began to crumble. Without Derek there to reinforce her confidence, she dissolved into messy, terrified tears. She looked at Hayes, then at me, her hands shaking uncontrollably. It was him, Tessa sobbed. It was all Derek. I told him not to hit her. I told him we should just go with Plan B if she refused to sign. Hayes looked up from his notepad. Plan B. Tessa froze, realizing she had said too much, but the silence was already filled with the implication. What is Plan B? Tessa, I asked. We had an appointment set up, she stammered, looking at the floor. For a competency evaluation. We were going to petition the court for emergency guardianship. We were going to say you were suffering from dementia and could not manage your affairs. The room seemed to tilt. They had not just planned to steal my house. They had planned to steal my mind. They were going to use the legal system to declare me insane so they could strip me of my rights legally. The dinner was just the opening act of a coup d'etat against my autonomy. The violence was to scare me. The papers were to silence me. Hayes closed his notebook with a sharp snap. He looked at me with a grim expression. Mrs. Caldwell, he said, I need you to understand something. Even if you decided right now that you wanted to forgive your son, even if you wanted to drop the assault charges, this investigation is not stopping. This is now a financial crimes case involving multiple victims. The state is picking this up. Derek is not going to be able to settle this at the dinner table. I looked at the empty chair where Derek had sat, where he had eaten my food and planned my destruction. Good, I said. I do not want a settlement. I want justice. I walked past the officers in the hallway, ignoring the commotion, and entered my bedroom. I moved the stack of shoeboxes in the closet and keyed the code into the small fireproof safe bolted to the floor. Inside lay a blue binder that I had not opened since the funeral. I carried it back to the kitchen and placed it on the island, right next to the fraudulent papers Derek had brought. "Lieutenant," I said, opening the binder to a page I had bookmarked with a red ribbon years ago. My husband did not just leave a warning note. He created a small, living trust. There is a specific forfeiture clause here that Derek does not know about. Hayes leaned in, reading the paragraph I pointed to. It states that if the beneficiary, my son, commits any act of physical or emotional abuse against the trustee, or attempts to coerce changes to the estate through intimidation, his right to the property is immediately and permanently revoked. I explained. Derek, standing near the doorway with the uniformed officer, went rigid. He had known there were strings attached to the house, but he had never known the wire was rigged to trip exactly the way he had just tripped it. That was why the word fraud had terrified him. He knew he was walking a thin line, but he had not realized Frank had dug a pit underneath him. I need to make one more call, I said. I did not wait for permission. I dialed the number for the firm, Caldwell and Renly. It was late, but I knew the emergency line would patch me through to our family attorney. "Hello," I said when the line connected. "This is Marianne. I need to execute the forfeiture clause on the Caldwell Trust effective immediately. My son has violated the non-aggression terms. I have police verification." I hung up. I did not ask for advice. I gave an order. Lieutenant Hayes nodded, looking at me with a new measure of respect. "Mrs. Caldwell, I am initiating an emergency protective order. We are going to remove him from the premises tonight. You will be entered into the victim support program, which means we will have a patrol car cycle past your house every hour for the next 48 hours. He cannot come within 500 feet of you." As the officer grabbed Derek's arm to escort him out, my son planted his feet. He twisted his neck to look at me, his eyes wide and desperate, searching for the button that would reset me to the mother he could control. "Mom," he rasped, his voice cracking. "Mom. Think about this. If you do this, if you send me away, you will be all alone. You will die in this big house all by yourself. You will rot here alone. It was a cruel, calculated strike." He aimed straight for the deepest fear of every widow, the terror of silence and solitude. I looked him in the eye. I did not blink. "Being alone," I said. My voice, clear and unwavering, is far better than being a hostage in my own home. Tessa, who was being led out behind him, suddenly snapped. The pressure was too much, and she turned on him, her loyalty evaporating the moment the handcuffs came out. "I told you," she screamed at Derek, saliva flying from her mouth. "I told you we should have waited. You ruined the plan. We were supposed to wait for the doctors." Her outburst hung in the air, toxic and revealing. It confirmed that this was not a crime of passion or a momentary lapse of judgment. It was a long-term strategy. They had discussed it. They had argued over the timeline of my destruction over their own dinner tables. The front door closed. The heavy thud echoed through the house. I looked down at the dining table. The roast chicken was cold. The gravy had congealed. The wine sat in the glasses, dark and still. I realized I was looking at a funeral spread. I was not mourning my death, but I was mourning the death of the illusion that my son was a good man who would eventually find his way. The kitchen was silent, but it was not the fearful silence of an hour ago, when I was waiting for the next insult. It was the silence of a decision that had been signed in my heart long before I would ever sign a police statement. I was alone. Yes. But for the first time in 3 years, I was safe. Just as the officer reached for his elbow to escort him out, Derek jerked his arm away. A frantic, manic energy took hold of him. He reached into his inner jacket pocket with his free hand. "Wait, you cannot arrest me," Derek shouted, his eyes darting between Hayes and me. "I have a pending complaint. She is mentally unstable. I have the paperwork right here." He pulled out a crumpled envelope and thrust it toward Lieutenant Hayes. It was his last card, a desperate gamble to flip the narrative. Hayes took the envelope, opened it, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He scanned it, his eyebrows knitting together. "This is a confirmation for a competency evaluation scheduled for tomorrow morning," Hayes said, looking up. "It is signed by Marianne Caldwell." I stepped forward. "I never signed that." "I know," Hayes replied dryly. He tapped a QR code at the bottom of the page. "Because the digital authentication stamp is linked to an email address, Marianne. Private email. Com. It matches the shadow account you just showed me on your laptop. You did not sign this, Mrs. Caldwell? He signed it for you." The trap snapped shut with a deafening finality. Derek had just handed the police physical proof of his intent to defraud the court. "And if that is not enough," I added, my voice cutting through the tension, "check the security footage at 6:45. You will hear Tessa say very clearly, 'If she does not sign tonight, we become her guardians.'" It was not a concern for my health. It was a conspiracy. Derek exploded. The facade of the concerned son vaporized, revealing the greedy, entitled stranger beneath. "It is your fault," Derek screamed, lunging toward me before the officer slammed him back against the wall. "All of this is your fault. Why could you not just give me the house? You do not need all this space. You are selfish. You owed me this." He had finally taken off the mask. He did not want a mother. He wanted an asset, Tessa. Seeing her husband pinned against the drywall, realized the ship was sinking and decided she would not go down with it. She backed away, shaking her head wildly. "I told him not to," she wailed, tears streaming down her face. "I did not want to do it. He made me. He did the same thing to Janet Rourke and the Millers. I just did what he told me." The room went deadly silent. Tessa had just turned a domestic dispute into a confession of a serial predatory ring. Hayes did not hesitate. He pulled the handcuffs from his belt. The metallic ratcheting sound was the loudest thing in the room. "Derek Caldwell," Hayes announced, his voice devoid of emotion. "You are under arrest for assault, battery, fraud, and identity theft." I watched my son's face. It happened exactly as I had imagined. The flush of rage drained away instantly, leaving his skin the color of old ash. His eyes went wide and vacant. It was the face of a man who had walked into a room as a king and was leaving it as a prisoner. He looked at me one last time as they hauled him toward the door. He looked small. I did not look away. I did not cry. I did not apologize. "You thought that slap would teach me my place," I said, my voice steady and clear. But it did not. It just reminded me that I am the owner of this house, and I am the owner of my life. The officers dragged him out. Tessa followed, sobbing into her hands. The front door slammed shut, sealing the noise of the night outside. I stood alone in the kitchen. I looked at the table, still set for a dinner that never happened. I walked over to the window above the sink and cranked it open. The cold Wisconsin night air rushed in, sharp and biting. I took a deep breath, letting the chill scrub the smell of their perfume and their lies out of my home. It was the smell of freedom. I picked up the phone one last time. I did not call a lawyer. I dialed a number I knew by heart. Hello. A sleepy, fragile voice answered. Janet, I said, gripping the phone tight. If you still have those old papers, do not destroy them. Tonight, I just caught the thing that took your house. Thank you so much for listening to this story with me. I would love to know where you folks are tuning in from. Drop your city or country in the comments below so we can see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed this, please make sure to subscribe to the Grandma's Family Diary channel, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Stay safe out there, everyone.